In the summer of 1978, the most prestigious martial arts gymnasium in Hong Kong was about to witness a confrontation that would be etched in the memory of everyone present. Danny Morrison, the British Commonwealth boxing champion with an impeccable record of 38 consecutive victories, had just made a statement that would resonate throughout the entire martial arts circuit. He claimed he was faster, stronger, and more skilled than Sammo Hung. Morrison's arrogance was not unfounded. Standing 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighing 215 pounds of pure muscle, he had demolished every opponent who dared face him. His fists moved like lightning, and his right hook had knocked out more than 24 competitors. But what was about to happen that afternoon would change not only his perspective on martial arts but his entire life. If you want to discover how this legendary confrontation ended and learn about the lesson that forever changed one of the most arrogant fighters of his era, stay until the end of the story. You will not regret it. It all began 3 weeks earlier during an interview with an international sports magazine. The journalist had asked Morrison what he thought about Sammo Hung, the Hong Kong martial arts choreographer and actor who was gaining recognition for his work in kung fu films and his incredible physical abilities despite his unconventional physique. Morrison, with a mocking smile, had responded without filter. "Sammo Hung is nothing but a fat movie stuntman," he declared as he leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed over his chest. "He does pretty tricks for the cameras, but in a real fight my speed and power would crush him in less than 30 seconds. I have faced the best fighters from multiple countries, and none of them has lasted more than 3 minutes with me. That chubby actor would not stand a chance against a real professional boxer." Morrison's words spread like wildfire throughout the martial arts community. At that time, Sammo Hung was already a respected figure in Hong Kong cinema, known for his innovative fight choreography and his ability to perform incredible acrobatic movements despite weighing over 200 pounds. He was not the lean, muscular stereotype that Western audiences associated with martial arts masters. His rounded physique had led many people, especially those unfamiliar with Chinese martial arts traditions, to underestimate him completely. But those who knew better understood that Sammo Hung was a master of Hung Gar Kung Fu, trained since childhood in the rigorous Peking Opera School alongside Jackie Chan and Yuan Biao. His skills were not special effects or camera tricks. They were the result of decades of brutal training that had forged him into a legitimate martial arts expert. When Morrison's declarations reached Sammo Hung's ears, he did not show anger. Instead, he smiled with that characteristic calm that puzzled those who knew him. He was working on a film set, choreographing a complex fight sequence, when one of his assistants showed him the magazine article. "Sifu, are you going to respond to this?" the assistant asked, expecting to see some reaction of fury or indignation. Sammo carefully folded the magazine and set it aside on a nearby table. His eyes sparkled with a mixture of amusement and determination. "I do not need to respond with words," he said simply. "Words are wind. Truth is demonstrated through action." That same afternoon, Sammo did something unexpected. He picked up the phone and called directly to the boxing gym where Danny Morrison trained. The conversation was brief but significant. Sammo was not calling to challenge or insult him. Instead, he made an invitation that left the boxing champion perplexed. "I have heard that you are the best," Sammo said with a polite but firm tone. "I would like you to come to my training hall this Saturday afternoon. Not to fight, but to train together. I believe we could both learn something from each other. What do you say?" Morrison, taken by surprise, felt his ego inflate even more. He interpreted the invitation as an admission of inferiority, as if Sammo Hung were seeking his approval or acknowledging his superiority. Without thinking twice, he accepted. In his mind, this would be the perfect opportunity to publicly demonstrate that Sammo Hung was all smoke and no fire, that his movie reputation meant nothing against real boxing skill. If you are enjoying this story and want to see how this incredible confrontation unfolds, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We are just getting started with this legendary encounter. Drop a like on this video if you appreciate stories about martial arts history that most people have never heard. And share this with anyone who loves combat sports. Trust me, you will want to tell people about what happens next. Now let us continue with this amazing story. Saturday arrived with the oppressive humidity typical of Hong Kong summers. Sammo Hung's training hall was modest, located on the 3rd floor of an old building in the Kowloon district. There was no luxurious equipment or gleaming mirrors like in the big commercial gyms. Just an open space with a wooden floor, some training dummies, heavy bags, and basic equipment. Traditional Chinese weapons hung on the walls, alongside photographs of Sammo's teachers and fellow students from the Peking Opera School. The atmosphere was one of authentic tradition, far removed from the polished commercial gyms of the West. When Danny Morrison entered, accompanied by 3 of his most loyal training partners, his expression was one of total confidence. He wore expensive athletic gear, designer shorts and a tight tank top that showed off his impressive musculature. Every movement he made transmitted power and dominance. He was the perfect image of the undefeated champion, the professional athlete who had conquered every challenge. His entourage carried themselves with similar arrogance, looking around the modest training hall with barely concealed disdain. Sammo Hung was waiting for him in the center of the training hall, wearing a simple black training uniform. His physique was exactly what Morrison had mocked, round and heavy, with none of the chiseled definition that Morrison displayed. Around them, approximately 20 people had gathered, students of Sammo, some local martial arts instructors, and curious individuals who had heard rumors about this encounter. Among them were several respected figures from the Hong Kong martial arts community, people who knew exactly what Sammo was capable of and who had come to witness what they suspected would be an educational moment. "Thank you for coming," Sammo said, extending his hand with genuine respect. Morrison shook the hand firmly, perhaps too firmly, as if wanting to demonstrate his strength from the first moment. "No problem," Morrison replied with a condescending tone. "I was curious to see what a movie choreographer could possibly teach a professional boxer." The dismissive tone did not go unnoticed by anyone in the room. Several of Sammo's students exchanged glances, but their teacher remained impassive with that tranquil smile that never left his face. "Let us begin with something simple," Sammo proposed. "I would like you to try to hit me. Just a straight punch with all your speed and power. I will not counterattack. I will only move to avoid it." Morrison let out a short, arrogant laugh.
Are you sure?
"I do not want to hurt you in your own training hall." "Do not worry about me," Sammo responded, positioning himself in a relaxed stance with his hands down, almost as if he were not prepared for anything. The boxing champion positioned himself in his perfect fighting guard. His years of training had refined his technique to make it devastating. When he threw a straight punch, the sound of air being cut was audible from several meters away. He had knocked out men with a single blow using that technique. Morrison breathed deeply, concentrating. He wanted this punch to be memorable, for everyone in that hall to see the difference between a true champion and an overrated movie performer. He tensed his muscles, visualized the perfect trajectory, and launched his fist with all the speed his years of training had given him. What happened in the next 3 seconds defied all logic for Danny Morrison. His fist cut through the air with impressive speed, aimed directly at Sammo Hung's face. But when the punch should have made impact, Sammo simply was no longer there. It was not a frantic or desperate movement. It was as if space itself had been reorganized. Sammo's body slid laterally with a fluidity that seemed impossible for someone of his size and build. The movement was so economical, so efficient, that it appeared effortless. Morrison's fist passed through empty air where an instant before Sammo's face had been. But that was not the most disturbing part. In the same movement, while Morrison's fist continued its failed trajectory, Sammo had placed his own open hand barely 1 inch from the boxer's throat.
It was not a strike.
It was a silent warning, but absolutely clear. If he had wanted to, he could have ended the encounter at that precise instant. Morrison stepped back with his eyes wide open. His brain was trying to process what he had just experienced. He had thrown one of his fastest punches, and not only had it not connected, but he had been completely vulnerable to a counterattack that never came. "Again," Sammo said simply, returning to his relaxed posture. The wounded pride of Morrison turned into furious determination. This time he was not going to fail. He threw a combination. Jab, cross, left hook. 3 punches in rapid succession, each one with enough power to finish a common opponent. Professional boxing combinations that had destroyed countless fighters in the ring. Sammo Hung moved like water flowing around rocks. Each of Morrison's punches found only air, and after each failed combination, Sammo's hand appeared at a vital point. The temple, the solar plexus, the jaw, the floating ribs. He never made contact, but the message was crystal clear. Morrison was completely exposed, completely vulnerable. After 8 attempts, the boxing champion was breathing with difficulty, not so much from physical effort but from frustration and disbelief. He had given everything. He had used his best techniques, his most devastating speed, and he had not managed to even graze this man who seemed to dance between his punches. A man who, according to everything Morrison had believed about fighting, should have been slow and clumsy because of his build. "Do you want to know why you cannot touch me?" Sammo asked, without a single trace of mockery in his voice. His tone was that of a genuine teacher, someone who wanted to educate, not humiliate. Morrison, with his pride in pieces but his mind open for the first time in years, nodded silently. "You are telegraphing every movement," Sammo explained, approaching. "Your punches are powerful, yes. Fast too. But you announce each one before throwing it. You tense your shoulder here." He gently touched Morrison's shoulder. "You shift your weight here," he indicated his hips. And you adjust your gaze here, he pointed to his eyes. By the time your fist begins to move, I already know exactly where it is going. Sammo stepped back a few paces and continued. You have trained your body to be a perfect machine, but that perfection has become your limitation. Every movement follows a pattern, an established form. In Western boxing, that is a virtue. You train the same combinations thousands of times until they become automatic. But that predictability is also a weakness that an experienced opponent from a different system can exploit. In Chinese martial arts, we train to be like water. Bruce Lee made this concept famous, but it has been part of our tradition for centuries. Water has no shape until it takes the shape of its container. A fighter should have no fixed pattern until the situation demands a specific response. The silence in the training hall was absolute. Everyone present knew they were witnessing something more than a simple demonstration. They were seeing the moment when an undefeated champion discovered that he had been operating with an incomplete understanding of combat. Morrison stood there, his chest heaving, his mind racing. Everything he had believed about fighting, about what made someone fast or skilled, was being challenged. Now, Sammo said with that smile he had maintained throughout the encounter, let me show you something. Sammo positioned himself in front of one of the heavy bags, one that weighed approximately 150 pounds. He stood at a distance of barely 2 inches from the bag. Then, without any visible preparatory movement, without pulling back his arm or rotating his hips in an obvious way, he struck. The sound was like thunder in the enclosed space. The bag folded in the middle, absorbing an impact that seemed impossible given the lack of travel in the punch. The bag swung violently backward, the chains holding it rattling loudly. But the most impressive thing was the speed. Morrison, who considered himself one of the fastest punchers in professional boxing, had barely seen the movement. It was like a blink, a flash of motion that defied his capacity for perception. This is called inch force, Sammo explained. In Cantonese, we call it Qian Jing. It is not about brute muscular strength or pure speed. It is about efficient energy transfer, about using the whole body as a coordinated unit, about releasing power without prior tension that telegraphs your intention. In Hung Gar Kung Fu, we train this principle from childhood. We learn to generate maximum force from minimum distance. This is how a smaller fighter can defeat a larger one. This is how someone like me, he gestured to his own body with a slight smile, can move faster than someone with your athletic build expects. Morrison stared at the still swinging heavy bag, then back at Sammo. His entire worldview was shifting. In your boxing, you have weight classes for a reason, Sammo continued. You assume that bigger and stronger always has an advantage. And within your system, within your rules, that is often true. But in traditional Chinese martial arts, we developed our systems in a world without weight classes, without rules, without referees. A smaller man had to find ways to defeat a larger opponent because in a real confrontation, there are no fair divisions. We develop techniques based on precision, timing, and exploiting structural weaknesses in the human body that exist regardless of size. Sammo spent the next 3 hours working with Danny Morrison. It was not a traditional class. There was no humiliation or ego. It was a genuine transmission of knowledge from one martial artist to another. Sammo showed him how every unnecessary movement was a lost opportunity, how economy of motion could multiply effectiveness, how the rigidity of conventional boxing, while powerful within its context, could be both a strength and a prison when facing unfamiliar systems. Morrison, to his credit, absorbed every lesson with the humility of a beginner. His ego had been dismantled, but in its place something much more valuable had been born. A genuine hunger to learn and evolve. Sammo demonstrated principles from Hung Gar Kung Fu, showing how the stance work and footwork created a stable base that allowed for explosive power generation. He showed Morrison how the circular movements of Kung Fu could redirect incoming force rather than meeting it head-on. He explained the concept of borrowing force, using an opponent's momentum against them. Watch carefully, Sammo said, positioning Morrison's training partner in front of him. The training partner threw a hard straight punch. Instead of blocking or dodging, Sammo's hand made contact with a punching arm, but rather than stopping it, his hand moved with it, redirecting it past his body while simultaneously his other hand snaked forward toward the partner's exposed centerline. The whole interaction took perhaps half a second, but the principle was clear. Minimum effort, maximum efficiency. This is Pak Sao in Wing Chun, we call it different things in Hung Gar, but the principle is the same, Sammo explained. In boxing, you are taught to block punches by meeting force with force, or to slip them by moving your head. Both valid techniques. But there is a third option. Guide the force past you while simultaneously countering. This is extremely difficult against a trained boxer because your hands are so fast and your combinations so tight, but it is possible if you understand the rhythm and pattern of boxing. Morrison was fascinated. In all his years of training, through amateur competitions and professional fights, no one had ever shown him anything like this. His coaches had perfected his boxing technique, made him a devastating puncher and a slick defensive fighter within the boxing paradigm. But this was something entirely different, a completely different philosophy of combat. Sammo then demonstrated something that would stay with Morrison for the rest of his life. He asked Morrison to hold a wooden training dummy, bracing it with all his strength. The dummy weighed about 80 pounds. Morrison, with his 215 pounds of muscle, held it firmly, confident his strength would be more than enough. Sammo took a stance several feet away, then suddenly exploded forward. His body moved as one unit, his feet driving power from the ground, through his legs, through his core, and into his shoulder, which struck the training dummy with devastating force. Morrison, despite bracing with all his strength, was driven backward several steps, nearly losing his grip on the dummy. The impact vibrated through his entire body. "That is Tai Gik, the fundamental training method of my style," Sammo explained. "We practice this thousands of times. It teaches you how to coordinate your entire body to deliver power. Not arm strength, not shoulder strength, whole body strength. This is why I can move like I do despite my build. Everything is connected, everything works together." As the training session continued, Sammo shared stories of his own training. He spoke about the Peking Opera School, where he and Jackie Chan and many others had trained as children. He described the brutal daily regimen that started at 5 in the morning and continued until late at night. Acrobatics, flexibility training, weapon forms, empty hand forms, conditioning exercises that would be considered extreme even by today's standards. "We trained every day for years," Sammo said. "No days off. If you made a mistake, you were punished. If you did not train hard enough, you were punished. It was harsh, maybe too harsh by modern thinking. But it forged us into performers and fighters who could do things others thought impossible." Morrison listened, his respect growing with every word. He realized he had completely misjudged this man. He had seen the exterior, the unconventional physique, and assumed it told the whole story. He had not understood that beneath that exterior was a foundation of training that began in childhood, a depth of skill that came from decades of dedicated practice in multiple martial arts systems. At the end of the session, as Morrison was preparing to leave, Sammo put a hand on his shoulder. "You have extraordinary talent," Sammo told him sincerely. "Your speed and power are real. Your boxing skills are impressive. But now you know there are levels beyond what you had imagined. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge?" Danny Morrison looked Sammo Hung in the eyes, and for the first time in years, he smiled with genuine humility. "I want to learn. If you will accept me as a student, I want to train with you. I want to understand what I saw today. I thought I knew what fighting was, but you have shown me I was only seeing a small part of the picture." That afternoon marked the beginning of one of the most fruitful teacher-student relationships across the divide between Western and Eastern martial arts. Danny Morrison would become one of Sammo Hung's private students, training with him whenever their schedules allowed. Under Sammo's guidance, Morrison would evolve from being simply a powerful boxer to becoming one of the most complete and technically sophisticated fighters of his era, someone who could blend boxing's directness and power with kung fu's subtlety and adaptability. Before we continue with the rest of this incredible story, I want to ask you something. Have you subscribed to this channel yet? Because we bring you the most amazing untold stories from martial arts history, stories that challenge what you think you know about combat and skill. If you are loving this content, hit that subscribe button right now. Smash that like button. And share this video with your friends who think they know everything about fighting. Trust me, this story gets even better. Let me know in the comments what you think so far. Now let us see what happened after this legendary encounter. Years later, long after Sammo Hung had become a legendary figure in Hong Kong cinema and martial arts, and after Morrison had retired from professional boxing with an enhanced reputation as someone who understood fighting on a deeper level, Morrison would reflect on that day in an interview. His words would resonate with wisdom gained through experience. "That day I learned the difference between being good and being great," Morrison said. "I was good, maybe even excellent in my style. I had achieved everything boxing could offer me. Championship belts, recognition, an undefeated record. But Sammo was at a completely different level. It was not just his speed or his technique. It was his deep understanding of fundamental combat principles that transcended any single style." Morrison continued, "I realized that day that I had been looking at fighting through a very narrow lens, seeing only what my boxing training had shown me. Do not misunderstand me, boxing is beautiful. It is effective. It has been refined over more than a century of competition. But it is also limited by its rules, by its assumptions about what fighting is. Sammo taught me to open my eyes and see the complete picture. He showed me that size and strength, which boxing emphasizes so much, are just two factors among many. That timing, precision, understanding of human body mechanics, these things can overcome raw physical advantages. The interviewer asked Morrison if he felt his boxing skills were inadequate after that experience. Morrison shook his head firmly.
Not at all.
Boxing gave me my foundation. It gave me speed, power, timing, distance management, all crucial skills. What Sammo gave me was an expanded perspective. He showed me how to integrate other principles into what I already knew. After training with him, I went back to boxing with new eyes. I saw openings I had never noticed before. I understood rhythm and pattern in ways I never had. My last few professional fights, I won them more easily than ever because I was not just a boxer anymore. I was a fighter with boxing as my base, but with an understanding that went beyond boxing's boundaries. The story of Danny Morrison and Sammo Hung became legendary in both the boxing and martial arts communities, not as a tale of humiliation and defeat, but as a testimony to the power of humility and the willingness to learn. Morrison never denied what had happened that day. In fact, he shared it openly, becoming one of the greatest advocates for cross-training and for respecting martial arts systems different from one's own. He would later say in interviews that his time training with Sammo Hung was more valuable than many of his professional victories because it transformed not just his fighting ability but his entire understanding of what combat arts could be. The encounter also revealed something fundamental about both men. Danny Morrison demonstrated that true strength does not reside in never failing, but in how one responds when limitations are exposed. He could have left that training hall angry, making excuses, dismissing what he experienced as tricks or lucky circumstances. Instead, he chose to acknowledge what he had seen, to admit his ignorance, and to pursue knowledge with the same dedication he had applied to boxing. That takes a special kind of courage, the courage to admit you were wrong, that your worldview was incomplete. Sammo Hung demonstrated that true mastery does not need to humiliate in order to teach, that knowledge shared with respect and compassion is infinitely more powerful than any demonstration of dominance. Sammo could have hurt Morrison during their first exchange. He could have struck him and proven his point through violence. Instead, he chose to demonstrate control, to show Morrison his vulnerability without exploiting it, to open Morrison's eyes without crushing his spirit. That is the mark of a true master, someone secure enough in their abilities that they do not need to prove anything through inflicting damage. The respect between the two men would last for decades. When Sammo traveled to the United States for film projects, he would occasionally visit Morrison. When Morrison had questions about techniques or principles, he would call Sammo. They remained friends and training partners across continents and cultures, bound by that afternoon in Hong Kong when an arrogant boxer learned humility and a generous teacher gained a dedicated student. This story also highlights something important about assumptions and prejudice in martial arts. Morrison had looked at Sammo's physique and made immediate assumptions about his capabilities. In the fitness-obsessed world of professional athletics, Sammo's build did not fit the template of what a fighter should look like. Morrison had assumed that his own chiseled physique and professional record automatically made him superior. He learned that day that physical appearance tells only part of the story, that skill developed over decades can exist in unexpected packages, that the human body is capable of remarkable things regardless of whether it matches aesthetic ideals. This lesson extended beyond martial arts for Morrison. He began to question other assumptions he had made in life, other areas where he had judged based on surface appearances rather than deeper investigation. The experience matured him not just as a fighter but as a person. His friends and family noticed the change. The arrogance that had characterized his personality softened into quiet confidence. The need to prove himself constantly faded. He became more interested in learning than in being recognized as the best. For Sammo, the encounter affirmed principles he had always believed but that were often dismissed by people outside traditional Chinese martial arts. The Western world in the 1970s was just beginning to be exposed to Asian martial arts through films and a few high-profile figures like Bruce Lee. But there was still widespread skepticism, especially among established Western combat sports communities. Many boxers, wrestlers, and other athletes viewed Kung Fu and other Asian martial arts as ineffective, as performance arts rather than combat systems. Sammo's ability to handle a professional boxer, even in a controlled demonstration, showed that traditional Chinese martial arts contained legitimate combat applications when practiced correctly. The story spread through martial arts schools across Hong Kong and eventually around the world. Different versions circulated, some exaggerated, some diminished, but the core truth remained. A professional Western boxer had challenged a Chinese Kung Fu practitioner and had discovered that his assumptions about fighting were incomplete. For many young martial artists in Asia, it was a point of pride, validation that their traditional training methods had value. For many Western martial artists who heard the story, it was an opening of awareness, a realization that effective fighting existed in many forms, developed through different cultural approaches to combat. If this story has inspired you and made you think about the importance of humility and constant learning, do not forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that there is always something new to learn, no matter how experienced you are. Leave me in the comments what lesson you take away from this legendary encounter between a professional boxer and a kung fu master. Let me know if you have ever had an experience where someone surprised you by being far more skilled than you expected. What did you learn from it? I read every comment and I love hearing your stories and perspectives. We will see you in the next video with more incredible stories from the world of martial arts and combat sports. Until then, keep training, keep learning, and always remain humble.